We have the reading now, and it's Judges chapter 16 and verses 15 to the end. So Judges 16 verses 15 to 31.
So it's Judges chapter 16, verses 15 to the end. And she said unto him, How canst thou say, I love thee, when thine heart is not with me? Thou hast mocked me these 3 times, and hast not told me wherein thy great strength lieth. And it came to pass, when she pressed him daily with her words, and urged him, so that his soul was vexed unto death, that he told her all his heart. And she said unto her, There hath not come a razor upon mine head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak, and be like any other man. And when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the Lord of the Philistines, saying, Come up this once, for he hath showed me all his heart. Then the Lord of the Philistines came up unto her, and brought many in their hand. And she made him sleep upon her knees. And she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head. And she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. And she said, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awoke out of his sleep, and said, I will go out at other times before, and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord had departed from him. But the Philistines took him, and put out his eyes, and brought him down to Gaza, and bought him, and bound him with fetters of brass. And he did grind in the prison house. Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. Then the Lord of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice. For they said, Our God hath delivered Samson our enemy into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, Our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy, and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. And it came to pass, when their hearts were merry, that they said, Call for Samson, that he may make us sport. And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport. And they set him between the pillars. And Samson said unto the lad that held him by the hand, Suffer me that I may feel the pillars whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there. And there were upon the roof about 3,000 men and women, that beheld while Samson made sport. And Samson called unto the Lord, and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars upon which the house stood, and on which he was borne up. It was borne up, of the one with his right hand, and of the other with his left. And Samson said, Let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. Then his brethren and all the house of his father came down, and took him, and brought him up, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, in the burying place of Manoah his father. And he judged Israel 20 years.
Thank you, Phil. We'll just have one more song then, and then I'll hand over to Neil. Let's have a look.
Thanks, Phil. That's really helpful. Just before we look at these verses from Judges, I'd just like to share a simple word of testimony with you. I often say, that God is interested in the little things of life, yeah? And He can plan things far better than we ever can. That's something we learn, isn't it? The longer we serve Him. We were coming back from our accommodation in Uppsala, and we had to drop off 2 hire cars, and we're travelling in commuter traffic that we're not familiar with, and we're travelling around roads, some of them which are new, some of them which are one-way systems, and basically if we get the timing wrong for dropping the cars off, there's a bus every 40 minutes. So there's a little bit of pressure on that. So we were having an argument whether to drop Bethan and Hannah and Karen and all the cases off at the airport, and then me and Phil go on. But when you're not familiar with roads, if you've got somebody sat next to you, you're trying to drive, and it can be a bit daunting. So we were having an argument what to do, and even on the way we changed our minds, and so we decided that all of us would go to the car hire place, just to stay together and to try and limit the times that everything would take. But at the back of my mind, I had this thing that if we didn't time it right, poor Hannah might be waiting around on a bus stop for up to 40 minutes waiting for a bus with not much to do. And so there was a little bit of pressure with it, as is often the way in life. And I missed a turn. There was a junction there, and there were 2 turns within about 50 metres, and the sat-nav was saying keep right, and I turned right. And I was getting a bit flustered because I knew I only had about a quarter of an hour, and this was going to eat into some of the time we had now, and if we missed the bus, you'd have the 40-minute wait. Well, the other issue that we had was the car hire. If you don't top the petrol up, they do it for you. And even if they can only squeeze in half a gallon, they charge you £25 refuelling for the privilege. So part of the issue was I didn't know where the nearest petrol station was either. Well, I took this wrong turn, and Phil and Beth on their sat-nav have got something that shows where the petrol stations are. And actually, taking the wrong turn, we ended up by a petrol station. So we topped up the petrol on the cars, we got to the car hire place, and we parked up with 6 minutes to spare. So me, in my human wisdom, thought 15 minutes would be what I would aim for, and God thought, no, little Hannah, let's just give her 6. And we had enough time to hand the cars over, do all the paperwork, and the bus literally came within a minute or 2 of us arriving at the bus stop. So, you just look back on those things, and you're just grateful to God that He's with us all the time. And even when we're getting flustered, because things aren't going to our schedule, we can take comfort from the fact that there's a reason and a purpose for everything in life. Just thought I'd share that with you. Let's have a look at Judges chapter 16 then. And we looked this morning at the birth of Samson, and we're looking tonight at the death of Samson. Obviously, on a Tuesday night, we've been looking at the studies in quite some detail around his life. But I was thinking of the birth, and I was thinking about the fact that it was a new dawn. It was the start of a new period in the history of Israel. And so we were looking then around the communion, about the fact that Christ came and gave a new covenant, and there was a change, wasn't there, in the context of everything. And then I was thinking about the death of Samson, and I was thinking about the context of the gospel message, and what is there in this chapter that speaks to us about sin, disobedience, reconciliation, forgiveness. And it's all here, isn't it? If we look through this story, we find these themes coming out as plain as day. So just to give a little bit of background to it, obviously Samson loved Delilah. The Bible makes that very clear to us that he loved her, and he was seeking to form a relationship with her. But quite tellingly, the Bible doesn't mention anything about her feelings for him. And she colludes with the Philistine leaders to actually betray Samson. And she agrees a ransom for him. And in today's money, it's believed to be something like £15 million. So it was no small sum of money. And she basically agreed that she would try and find out from Samson what the secret of his strength was so that they could capture him. And throughout the chapter 16, the bits that we didn't read earlier, if you look at them, you'll see the various things that Samson told her. He obviously could smell a rat, if you like. He could see that things weren't quite as they appeared to be. But his love for her kept him in that relationship. And it kept him in a dangerous position. And gradually she got nearer and nearer the truth, until in the end, he told her everything that he believed was the reason why he had the strength that he had. And it was all down to the Nazarite vow that he had kept ever since his birth, about certain foods that he wouldn't eat, certain things that he wouldn't drink, and the fact that his hair had never been shaven. And he shares this with Delilah. It's really sad because in verse 15 she asked him, "Why do you say that you love me and you won't tell me the secrets of your heart?" And she really pulled on his heartstrings, and she didn't love him at all. And it wasn't his lack of love that was the problem, it was her lack of love, her lack of loyalty to him. But anyway, she managed to get out of him everything that she needed to know. So she lulls him to sleep. A man comes in and snips off the hair, and then she wakes him up with a cry of, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." And the Bible tells us in verse 20 what his thought process was at this time, and it's really quite sad, isn't it? Because if you look at verse 20, it says, "And she said, 'The Philistines are upon you, Samson.' He awoke from his sleep and said, 'I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free.' But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him." He was focused very much on his abilities, focusing very much on what had happened in the past, and was taking it for granted that he could just do it again. But he failed to see that God was no longer with him. And this verse shows us, doesn't it, the difference between standing in our own strength and standing with God with us. We need to be very fearful about presumption, isn't it? We can't presume. We can't presume to be strong. We need to turn to him for our strength. We can't presume to be in control, because we're not. I often use that phrase, the illusion of control. We have plans and we pretend that we're in control. And yet the reality is we're not in control, are we? The reality is we need to surrender ourselves to him, because there is only one who really knows the beginning from the end, and that is our Father. And Samson thought that he could rely upon his own physical strength. Samson thought that he could deliver himself out of the predicament that he found himself in. And this is really a picture, isn't it, of where we all were before we became Christians. What were we relying upon? Well, we were relying upon ourselves. We were relying upon our own goodness, our own righteousness, our own good deeds, our own thoughts. And we thought that we were good enough as we were. And for anybody to become a Christian, we have to come to that place where we realise that we are not good enough. We aren't good enough. No one is perfect enough. Only one person has ever lived a perfect life, and that's the man Christ Jesus. Nobody else has ever lived the life that is able to meet the standards of God. Samson thought that he was able to do more than he really could without God. And so often we believe that we're able to do things that without the strength of God, we're not able to do anything at all. Without God's blessing on our life, then what does our life amount to? But with God's blessing on our life, what are the limits to what God can do? It changes everything, doesn't it? And Samson had gone through his life knowing the blessing of God upon him. And he had come to take it for granted. And now he had lost it. And he was totally oblivious to the fact that it had even gone. He did not know that the Lord had departed from him. As a nation, when we throw out the belief of God, we throw out so much, don't we? There are so many problems now in society that we face. And really, the root cause of it is that people don't believe that there's a God to give account for anymore. And it is starting to really undermine the whole foundation stones of our whole society. Because we believed that we can get by without him. As a nation, we don't think that God is important. We don't think that God is relevant. And we presume that we are able to do so much. And yet the reality is that everything comes crashing down without God's strength and without God's blessing on what we are about and what we are doing. God has this wonderful ability, doesn't he, of taking the smallest insignificant things in our life and doing something great with it. We often look at our life and we often make decisions on what we think were the important days, what we think were the important words, what we think were the important meetings. And I really do believe that when we get to heaven and we actually see how everything is fitted into the plan of God, we'll be actually astonished at some of the things that we missed, that we thought were so trivial, and yet God has used them. God has used them to strike a little seed into the heart of somebody's soul that has maybe come to fruition years and generations later. God has this wonderful way of just taking what we're able to give him and using it for his glory. But Samson had got to the stage where he was relying upon himself. He thought he could shake himself free. He thought that he would be strong. But without God, he found out that he could do nothing. So what was the result of sharing the secret with Delilah? What was the result of losing the strength that God had given him? Well, the result is what we find in verse 21. The Philistines took him. For the first time in his life, they managed to capture him. The Philistines took him. They put out his eyes. Cruel thing, isn't it? They took away his sight. And they brought him down to Gaza. They bound him with bronze fetters and he became a grinder in their prison. When you look at that verse, what are the three things that it talks to us about? He was blind, he was bound, and he was belittled. His physical sight was removed from him. His feet were bound in fetters, and they made him to grind in the prison. This great hero, this great leader, this great judge of the people of Israel, he could no longer see anything that was in the room. He could no longer physically see what needed to be done. And it's really a picture, isn't it, of what is on the outward, of what had already gone on the inside. He had lost sight of God, he had lost sight of his calling in God, and now he has physically lost his sight. He had allowed himself to become bound in a relationship that was not of God's leading. He had allowed himself to fall into situations that were dangerous, that would cause him harm. And he had ended up being totally belittled. Instead of being this great man of God with incredible strength, he just sat there grinding with a little, what do they call it, pestle?
Pestle.
Thank you. Bit before my time, Pete. Blind, bound, and belittled. What does sin do to us? What does sin do to us before we're converted? What does sin do for people who are outside of the grace of God? Well, it leaves them blind, doesn't it? You can't see. Without God in your life, you do not have the right perspective. Without God in your life, you do not see the consequences of life. You're totally blind. You're walking, you're stumbling around in the dark. What else are we in our sin? Well, we're bound. It's really one of the great paradoxes of life, that people believe that becoming a Christian is a narrow life and is constrained. That's a lie from the devil. The Christian life is not a constrained life. The Christian life is an expanded life. Being a Christian doesn't mean that my life has shrunk down. Being a Christian means that my life has grown. People believe that without God they're free. Satan is not a better taskmaster than God. Satan is not a kinder master than God. And sin binds. It holds people, it constricts people, it constrains people, it holds people. It is not there to give you freedom, it is there to do the exact opposite. Blind, bound, belittled. God created us to be the children of God. God created us in his image to bear the Spirit of God. And yet what has sin done? It has robbed us of that. And those who don't know Christ, those who have not come to the foot of the cross, their life has been belittled. Satan sneers at them, the devil laughs at them. Instead of being the people of God with all that heritage has brought, we're just grovelling in the dust. We're just counting down the days. And our life has very little meaning. And it definitely doesn't have the potential and the meaning that it should have. Even the most successful people in life, I'm sure the history books of heaven are going to be different to the history books of world. I love history, but God's perspective is totally different to man's. And the things that really matter, the things that really count in heaven, are the things that will carry eternal weight. And we need to be so careful, don't we, that our time here on earth, what did Jesus say? Where your treasure is, there your heart is also. Don't lay up for yourself treasure on earth, but lay up for yourself treasure in heaven. Don't devote all your time and effort to the accumulation of the things and the clutter of life. But devote your time and attention to those things that carry weight in heaven, the things that are important to God. Blind, bound, and belittled. That is what Samson had become. And then he is dragged off to a prison. And it would have been really tragic if that was the end of all things, wasn't it? But thankfully, it's not the end. And thankfully, the gospel story does not end with what we are and who we are in our sin, without hope and without rescue. That is not where the gospel story ends. When he was taken down into Philistia, I think they called it, they basically then decided that they would have a great celebration, a great feast. And the Bible tells us in verse 23 that they started rejoicing in what their God had delivered into their hands. Who? Samson. Samson, our arch enemy, the one who has caused us so much trouble. God has delivered him into our hands. And so they started to celebrate the fact that their God was stronger than the God of Israel. And they crossed the line there, didn't they? No longer are they just mocking Samson now, they're mocking his God. Our God has delivered him into our hands. And their mocking of God and their mocking of Samson isn't just verbally. They then call for Samson and they make a public show of him. And again, he's there for their sport. He is there to be mocked. But what they have failed to see is what it tells us in verse 22. The hair of his head began to grow again. That hair was symbolic of the vow that he had made to God. God had promised him that if there's certain things that you do, I will bless you with supernatural strength. And it wasn't just his hair that was growing again. Samson obviously had time to reflect upon life. He had time to reflect upon what had happened and how he had got to where he was. And as with all things in life, when we reflect, we've got a choice, haven't we? And the choice is we either accept the situation or we change it. When man is faced with his guilt and his sin, he has a choice. There is always a choice. And the choice is we can either keep it or we can leave it at the cross. And it always amazes me that so many people do not avail themselves of the opportunity of handing over their sin, their guilt, their punishment on the cross. Why would you not make that transaction? Yet man's pride is so strong. His belief in his own goodness is so strong He won't let go of his sin. Samson thought he could rely upon his own strength. But during this time of reflection, he has started to think about God again. And we know that because he asked the young lad to take him to the two pillars that supported the whole amphitheatre, the wooden arena that he was performing in. But when he got there, his prayer, his audible prayer, shows us the changes that have gone on in his heart. Because what do we read in verse 28? Then Samson called to the Lord, saying, O Lord God, remember me, I pray. He's not focusing upon himself now, he's focusing upon God. Remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray. He is asking for God's assistance. He is asking for God's help. He has understood where the source of his strength really lay. It wasn't in him, it was in his God. And he understands that God is a God of grace. He understands that, yes, he's made a mess. He knows that he's blind. He knows that he's bound. He knows that he's being belittled and mocked. And yet he also knows that God is still on the throne and God will still listen to his prayer. Isn't it lovely? Dad mentioned in his prayer this morning that God's grace is bigger than our sin. And isn't that a wonderful thing? That it doesn't matter how low we fall, God can always hear us. God can always see us. And even greater than that, God can always reach us. Satan will often tell us, won't he, that you've gone too far this time. Father won't listen to you this time. You can't come back this time. And yet the Word of God shows us there's always a way back. If we're willing to humble ourselves, if we're willing to call out to God, there is always a route back to the Father. The prodigal son shows us that, didn't he? He wasted everything. He was worse off than the pigs. And yet when he came to his senses, Father accepted him back. God is there. And again, the story of the prodigal son, what does it show us? Was the father going about his business? Had the father forgotten all about the son? Every morning, he went to the top of the house. He looked across to see if his son was coming home. He was always looking for the return of his son. That's how much he loved him. And when he saw him, does he stand at the gate, allow him to walk the walk of shame, waiting for him to come to him? No, he runs to him. He goes to meet him. He wants him to know as soon as possible, look, you're accepted. You're back. You're with me. I don't know about you, but my experience of God is exactly the same. He doesn't put you in a situation where you're on trial, you have to prove yourself again. He accepts you back. He runs to you. He embraces you. Again, I think it was quoted in a prayer this morning, wasn't it? To feel the warmth of God's embrace. And that's a reality for all of us, isn't it? It's not just the fact that God forgives us, but he accepts us. He doesn't just tolerate us, he enjoys your company. He enjoys your company. He delights to hear you talk to him. He delights in your worship. He delights in your prayers. He delights in you wanting to spend time with him. Oh Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray. To remind you of somebody else's prayer just before they died. Somebody with Jesus, the thief on the cross. Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. It's all he could plead for, wasn't it? Was the mercy of God. He couldn't do anything about it. Samson couldn't do any other great works for God. He wasn't able to go out and lead the people of Israel again. Samson was there. He knew this was going to be his death. The thief on the cross, he knows he's dying. He can't make a contract. He can't make a bargain. He can't say to God, well, look, save me and I'll do this for you. He can't do anything. All he can do is die. And yet, he knows he knows he can still cry out, will you remember me? Isn't it lovely to know that we're never forgotten of God? God never forgets you. He always knows where you are. He always knows what you're about. He's always got his eye looking out for you. Not that eye that looks out to trip you up. Not that eye that's there, a judgmental eye. But the eye of a parent that's keeping the eye on the child to make sure the child's safe. The eye that cares. The eye of concern. Samson knew he could call out to God and God would hear him. Each and every one of us, if we come to the point of the cross, we have known that experience where we have simply called out, God, will you remember me? Can I come to you? Will you accept me? And we have found the warmth of God's embrace. Lord, remember me. Don't let me fall from your thoughts. Don't let me fall from your sight. And God hears that prayer. And the prayer is open to everybody, isn't it? There's nobody that we come into contact with that we have to ask ourselves that question, does God want this person saved? The heart of God is that all should be saved and that none should perish. We can share the good news of the gospel with confidence that God wants the world to hear it. God is willing to hear the cry of the penitent sinner. He heard our cry. He will hear the cries of those around and about us. Samson, the fall and rise. His fall was great, but his rise was great too. Yes, he was blinded, bounded, and belittled and mocked, but he found restoration with God. He called out to God. He asked God to give him strength one last time. And he pushed with all his might, and those pillars came down. And those people who had been so jubilant at his capture and had been celebrating his demise, those very people learned that day, to their cost, that their God was not stronger than Jehovah. That Samson was not the beaten foe that they thought that he was. And that God is still upon the throne. And God still reigns and rules. And Samson knew forgiveness. Samson knew restoration. And I thank God that each and every one of us can know the forgiveness of God, and we can be restored and embraced once again by the Father. Just in closing, there's always types and shadows, and they always have their limitations, I know that. The enemies of God thought that if they see Samson, that they would be in control and that would be the end of their problems. In seizing Samson, they brought about their own demise. The one who they thought they caught was the one who turned the tables on them. It gives me a little picture of Satan taking Christ into the grave. He plotted for his downfall. He worked through Judas to get him betrayed. He thought that if he killed him, he would have the upper hand. And what did Christ do? He defeated death. He turned the tables on Satan. And Satan thought that he had Christ. But it was always in the plan of God that Christ would actually defeat the power of death itself. God is never ambushed. God is never surprised. God is never outthought or outfought. God is always victorious, and God's plans always come to fruition.